I'm Dr. Lucy Thorne. I'm a lecturer and research fellow at Imperial College London, and I study emerging viruses and how they overcome our frontline immune defences to spread effectively in humans and cause pandemics. Outbreak's like a real-life scenario and a discovery practical activity that we run in schools in the UK and also in Sierra Leone. And the students have to form teams of infectious disease scientists who are tasked with investigating a mystery outbreak of disease that starts in their school and begins to spread nationwide. And they have to perform a series of tests to discover the cause, and then they have to work out what they do with that information, so how they communicate it and how they're going to stop the outbreak. I think if we can empower the public with the knowledge of what causes infectious diseases and how they spread, then we can empower them with the message that if you understand that, you can take action to protect yourself, your family, your communities. And this is really important in thinking about the infectious diseases we encounter on a daily basis and routinely, but also is really important in an outbreak scenario. So as we've seen in the pandemic, it really takes everyone to do their part to try and effectively stop the spread of a new disease. We began doing public engagement in Sierra Leone after witnessing the response to the Ebola outbreak there firsthand in 2015. And we realised that at the start of the pandemic, some of the response was hindered by a lack of understanding of what the virus was and real fear around the messaging. So community outreach played a really key role there in bringing the outbreak to an end. And we felt like there was a moment there where people were tuned in to thinking about the virus, where we could engage, and we wanted to spark conversations and curiosity about infectious diseases and empower them with the message that we've talked about, that understanding that helps you protect yourself. I think there are many ways to approach public engagement, and I think there's a role for all different mediums. I think the way we've done it really works. You always have to think about the audience you're trying to reach and what's going to be most engaging, and we've really targeted school children in schools in the UK and in Sierra Leone. And that we felt like was best done through really practical, exciting, discovery, hands-on activities that enable you to then have conversations around that. So in this audience, it's definitely something we found works well. But as I said, I think there are many ways, and really important that we try different mediums to reach different audiences. So a highlight of my outreach work, I think, is the first week that we ran a trial in Sierra Leone. It was absolute chaos. We started way too big. We had too many students and we hadn't really properly, we were there to trial the activities. But the week, despite the chaos, was brilliant. We learned a huge amount about how to deliver the activities. We trained the team there. And it was the first time I realised that this could work. You saw the sense of kind of excitement and discovery in those moments in the students' faces. And it felt like a huge achievement to get the programme off the ground. And our team's gone on to engage over 7,000 students there, over 20 hours of engagement each. So I'm really proud of what they've accomplished. I think our public engagement does work in two ways. We are there to talk about infectious disease and public health. We're there also to empower students, and that goes beyond just thinking about infectious disease. It's also about promoting curiosity and scientific thinking. And by doing this and building confidence, I think you can start to change perspectives and broaden people's horizons. Maybe that's about infectious diseases, maybe that's about what they consider their own interests to be and how they're going to pursue them, and through higher education as well. So I think there's a lot that you can encompass, even if you're just solely there initially to talk about infectious disease. Preparing this talk has really helped me think about the future of this and where I want to take it. It's been a great chance to reflect on what we've done, but even just dedicating that time to think about this and prepare the prize lecturers, spark some new ideas, and talking to people about it always really helps do that. I'm really thinking now about how we run, for example, Outbreak in a post-pandemic era, whether it still has the same impact and the sensitivities around running that. So I've got some new ideas about how we can develop that to keep running the programme, but also to make the reagents and the materials, everything we've developed for these materials, more available, so that ultimately it's not limited by me and the team running it, and other people have access to this as well. When I found out I'd won the Peter Wildy Prize, I was shocked, firstly. I've been coming to the conference for years, and I've been to the other Peter Wildy Prize lectures and the public engagement and outreach sessions, so I know that there are some fantastic outreach activities that go on that are led by the society members. So it was quite an honour to win this. I was really delighted. And I just felt like this is a prize that I would like to share. There's been some really key people that I've done this with and that have helped me along the way, and teams of people that have really been the ones helping to deliver the activities. So it's important to me that I try and use this to showcase the impact that they've all had to. To share this prize, I'd really like to thank Professor Ian Goodfellow in particular. He was my supervisor as a PhD student, but we ended up running and taking on the Sierra Leone Public Engagement Programme together. We developed and created it together. And then I've got to thank the team there who have been running it. They've been the one in schools every week, really leading the activities. Alongside that, I've had teams of volunteers in the UK who help come along with every outbreak scenario that we do. And with their support, it means that the students really get the most out of the engagement activity. They get the most contact time with scientists, and that's why I think the whole thing works.
The Peter Wildy Prize is named after a distinguished virologist, Peter Wildy, who was president of the Society from 1978 to 1981, and is awarded for outstanding contributions to microbiology education or the communication of microbiology to the public. A truly worthy winner of this award, Lucy's research group is focused on understanding how emerging viruses evolve to overcome our frontline defense against new viruses, the innate immune system, and what makes pandemic viruses special in their ability to do this. Her early research characterized virus and host factors as important for norovirus infection. During this time, she deployed her molecular virology skills to support the Ebola virus outbreak response in Sierra Leone. At the start of the pandemic, she pivoted her research to focus on the timely questions about how SARS-CoV-2 overcomes the human innate immune response. Now her research aims to maximize what we can learn from SARS-CoV-2 about how pandemic viruses emerge and evolve to spread effectively in humans by fine-tuning how they manipulate the innate immune system. Lucy is widely involved in public engagement. Following the Ebola virus outbreak, she established a creative, discovery-based science program for school children in Sierra Leone, as well as an interactive outbreak scenario which she runs for school children in the UK. Please welcome Lucy, who's going to deliver her lecture today on infectious science outbreaks.
Good evening, and thank you so much. I have to say a huge thank you to the Microbiology Society for this prize, and to the two people who nominated me, Matt Reeves and Wendy Barclay from the Virus Division. It really means a lot. As you'll see today, the Microbiology Society has helped me at various points through my career, and I've been coming and been inspired by the other Peter Wildy talks over the years. So it's a real honour to be up here. And to say it's also a little daunting. There are some really key people that I have to share this with, and I'm going to mention them along the way, but it's really important to me that I try and use this talk to showcase the impact that all of the teams of people I've worked with to do public engagement have had. So my talk today is going to be a story of 3 short chapters. I'm going to start by telling you about, how and why I began doing outreach and public engagement in the first place, and share some of the tips and tricks that have helped me develop along the way, so that in chapter 2 I can show you how I use these to develop some original public engagement activities in Sierra Leone following the Ebola virus outbreak. And then finally I'll show you how I've developed one of those activities, a simulated outbreak, to run in schools in the UK. But today isn't just for looking back. Already, just by putting this talk together and talking to many of you about it, it's sparked some new ideas for me. And so I really hope that it does that for you too, for those of you in here that I know already run fabulous public engagement, but also for anyone who might be thinking about how to start out doing this. One of the things I think I enjoy most about our career in research is the variety of things that we get to do. Now, sometimes the sheer variety of things is a bit overwhelming, and striving for that kind of elusive balance is difficult, where you always have science and research at the forefront. I've found that some things, like public engagement, for me, take time out. but what they give me back, energy and motivation, a chance to develop skills beyond the lab, and also the space really to think about my research differently. And all of this you can harness and try and channel into driving your research forward. So for me now, I see public engagement as being kind of integral to my approach to both research and teaching, where the three kind of drive and inform each other. And I hope I'll show you some of the benefits of doing it today. So to get going, chapter 1, why did I begin doing outreach? For this, I have to go back to school. So I've really deliberated whether to share something so personal in this, but it felt important to me in explaining why I began doing this. So for secondary school, I went to my local neighbourhood comprehensive, and there was a period while I was there where the school ran into real difficulties. It was struggling somewhat, and then we merged with a school up the road that had been shut down, and this created some really challenging circumstances for students, teachers, and in fact the whole area. And this kind of tipped the balance and resulted in the school failing an inspection, and through my exams, becoming an officially failing school. So I now know that this is all relative, but at the time, it really didn't always feel like a very safe environment to be in, particularly, I guess, in science practicals, where there are a lot of things that can be set on fire and thrown. But it also really was an environment where you felt like being curious and asking and answering questions that was something that you wanted to stand out for doing. And if you think about it, these are all the foundations of being a scientist. So being there through that time really made me realize two things. Firstly, that there were some amazingly committed teachers who were able to not just kind of stick it out through that phase, but they were able to teach. And to do this, they had to first engage the students in really creative ways. So this is firstly where I think some of our outreach and public engagement in schools can come in and support, by inspiring and exciting about science in ways that I've found weren't always possible in the classroom. And the second thing is, I could see even then that I was just really lucky to have a family that were able to support me and give and create opportunities that broaden my horizons. So this, I also later realized, is one of the things I most enjoy about outreach, that it does let you create opportunities in different ways, but for other people. So these two factors were really what enabled me to follow science to an A-level sixth form college and then to university in Oxford, which was quite a bewildering change from my school environment that I think was literally demolished and rebuilt that same year. But while I was there, I started running biochemistry open days and school visits, and realized what might sound quite obvious, but if you talk really openly and enthusiastically about what you most enjoy and find interesting, then you license other people to do the same. If you ask questions, then you spark curiosity. If you really listen to the answers, then you help build someone's confidence. And all of this can really change someone's perspective about both higher education and also science, and broaden people's horizons. So the ways I do public engagement now have changed and moved on, but these are really the foundations of why I do it and what I enjoy about it. Also, because these are some of the things that it's given me. So take, for example, building confidence. When I started my PhD, I was really quite nervous. I kind of struggled with confidence and in my own ability. But luckily, I was in a lab with some great people, particularly here on the second in, Dan Bailey, who was my postdoc supervisor and really helped me with this. And also Ian Goodfellow, here in the middle, a pointer. Here's Ian, who, as you'll see throughout this, has been a major support. So one of the things I most struggled with was communicating science and giving presentations. I think this is normal to be nervous. I know, especially I still get nervous, especially on a day like today. But for me, it kind of stemmed back to a fear of public speaking and speaking out from school. And I've got, you may notice, a naturally wobbly voice. But when I'm nervous, this has the potential to get really out of control shaky. And I realized this after my first conference talk at a microbiology society meeting, where the chair came over to me after to very kindly check in if I was okay. I think it sounded like I was about to cry. Not a good look. He gave me some very honest and kind advice, really, which was that I needed to learn to get over this and try and control my voice, or it may hold me back. I really appreciated hearing this very honestly and realised that the only way to get better at communicating science is, of course, to practice it. And so building on the outreach work I'd done, I thought that public engagement was a great way to do this. Luckily, I was doing my PhD on a virus that really lends itself to public engagement, norovirus. So it already had a nickname in the press of the winter vomiting bug, and that the tabloids like to get pretty creative about. And it's also known as the two-bucket disease, which may, I'm afraid, help me recognize it. Most of you in here will have experienced it, perhaps multiple times. But in this way, it actually makes it quite easy to engage people in talking about norovirus. Also because I found that people are weirdly open in sharing their norovirus stories. So what I started trying to do was think about different ways beyond the science that we could use to engage audiences, both in my science talks, but also in talking to the public. And I just thought I'd give you an example of how I now do this for student talks in schools, but also actually in lectures. So we know that in one droplet, if you like, a milliliter of an infected stool sample from a norovirus patient, you can get up to 5 billion viruses. Now, I think when we work in science, you get used to throwing around these crazy big numbers. But for students, I like to try and put this in context and visualize it. So to give this a local flavour, as we're in Edinburgh, I wonder if anyone knows the capacity of the Murrayfield Rugby Stadium, which is just up the road, the home of Scottish rugby. Because I'm not sure I'm going to be able to hear or see any answers, I'll let you know that it's around 67,000. So if every person in here was a virus, then 5 billion viruses would be the equivalent to around 74,000 stadiums. Staggering. Now, what's even more impressive is that we know from some very willing volunteer studies that you need as little as 20 viral particles to become infected with norovirus. So through the course of one infection, in theory, one person produces enough virus to infect everyone on the planet. Now, of course, we know this doesn't happen, but it's a great way in to start talking about why norovirus is so transmissible and the public health measures that we have to use as the only way to contain norovirus infections to protect, if not everyone on the planet, at least the people that you live with. So I began practicing all of this by going to science festivals. And actually, again, this was with the Microbiology Society. They had an outreach team at the time who ran 2 stands and needed volunteers to help at some of the big UK science festivals like the Big Bang and also Cheltenham Science Festival. Now, science festivals are a brilliant way to begin in public engagement. Firstly, because the audience there is friendly. Everyone is there and open to being engaged. And I'm going to talk a little later about how you reach, the harder to reach audiences. The second reason is that it really helps you hone your communication skills. At a science festival, you have no idea who's going to walk up to you next. Could be a 5-year-old, could be an 85-year-old member of the Royal Society. So what you have to do is learn to adapt and deliver the same message at all different levels and to all backgrounds by simply changing the language that you use. And then thirdly, there's just a genuine buzz in the air at a science festival. Everyone is there because, I guess, as we are, they're excited to learn and hear about science. So it's a great place to swap ideas and really kind of meet people who are doing similar things. So alongside the science festivals, I felt like to really get over the nerves, I needed some more official kind of training in doing science communication and public engagement. And I think now the universities offer some fantastic courses for this, but at the time, I just threw myself into the deep end and entered a science communication competition called FameLab. Now this, I think, was around or started in the same era as X Factor, hence the name. But if that puts anyone off, because it very nearly did me, I promise it's nothing like that. What it is a brilliant event that's run every year by Cheltenham Festivals, where you have to pitch an idea or your research in 3 minutes without slides to a lay audience. But the best bits are that there are a panel of academics and professional science communicators who train you and help you do this. It's also an international competition, so you meet people from all over the world talking about all kinds of science in new and exciting ways to learn from. So I know that from this week, this room is full of fantastic communicators. But just for any early career researchers who are starting out, I thought I'd just share 2 of the things that I learned through FameLab and that have really stuck with me and helped me develop in communication. And that is firstly this advice: be a connoisseur of communication. Now, I know this sounds a bit cheesy, but what it really means is think about, for you, what really makes a great talk, or what makes you switch off. And then pay attention not just to what someone is saying, but how they are saying it. And then challenge yourself to try and incorporate some of these things into your own talks until you develop a style that you think works for you. And you can do that in all talks, podcasts, radio interviews. And the second thing is really now how I approach every talk that I do in either a public audience, but for a scientific audience as well, even for fellowship interviews. And this is to, before I even open and step near PowerPoint, is to try and think about what are the key messages that I want to get over, and visualize these as a series of stepping stones. Now, what this does is distill all of that, hugely important information in your head into some really clear take-home messages so that you don't overwhelm your audience. And it starts to build a narrative for your talk, as some of the best talks are often about great storytelling. If you say these out loud before you kind of commit them to memory and write them down, then it gives the whole talk a more conversational tone, which is often the most engaging. If you're someone who gets nervous as well, then be 100% sure of where you're going to begin. And by this, I mean know exactly what you're going to say first. And then learn your linkers. So these are the sentences that help you jump from stone to stone. And if you're using slides, a top tip is to have these at the bottom of each slide. So no matter what happens, if you start veering off into deep water, then they're always there to get you back on track, and they give your talk flow. And then finally, just pause before you jump. Now, this split-second pause is enough to give your audience the chance to really take in that message before you move on. But crucially, for anyone else who gets a shaky voice, gives you a chance to breathe. And this is what I found controlling the nerves is really all about. So actually, I started trying to incorporate all of this into all of my talks, as I said, and came back to the Microbiology Society conference 2 years later for a main symposium talk. And it's honestly the first one that I sort of felt like I was starting to manage to do this and started to enjoy. And from there, I was really lucky. I ended up winning the Young Microbiologist of the Year prize. So again, thank you to the Microbiology Society, because this was a real moment for me. It made me realize that perhaps some of these other things that I'd been working on were really working and were helping me to showcase my research, which was, of course, the most important thing. And it also made me realize that this is an ongoing process. Every talk or interaction with the public that we do is a chance to challenge yourself about what you think, but also how you say it, how you communicate it. So this really leads me to chapter 2. This gave me a lot of experience and confidence in starting to think about how I might develop my own or original public engagement activities, which we ended up doing in Sierra Leone after being there as part of the Ebola outbreak response. So this was, as you may remember, still one of the it was the largest known Ebola outbreak to date. It ran from 2013 to 2016, and this was for many different reasons. At the time, I was a postdoc in Ian's lab, and Ian was one of the first virologists who responded to the call for UK virologists to go out and help establish diagnostic labs in the treatment centres that the UK built. And these were about providing infrastructure, personnel, and protective equipment to help support local efforts. This is something I still really admire, because at this point in the outbreak, it was still pretty much out of control and a very big unknown. So whilst there, Ian felt the need to be learning something about the virus through sequencing. But to do this, to be able to contribute to the outbreak response, it needed to be done in country and in real time. So with members of the lab, we set up a sequencing facility and ran the facility pretty much in this tent in the treatment centre. And this really came into its own at the end of the outbreak, where we were able to help contribute knowledge of tracking and tracing where new infections were coming from. And it was a really inspiring thing to be part of, but also because it enabled me really to gain an appreciation of the whole outbreak response and the multiple levels. So there's a danger here that I could talk all day about this, but to just tell you a bit about what was relevant to today. One of the things we realised had been most important was the community outreach through the outbreak. And this was because at the start of the outbreak, the response was thought to have been very much hindered by a lack of understanding of what the virus was and how it was spreading in the population. There were also a lot of mistrusts around some of the messaging, and a lot of this came from the need for safe burials, where people in white and yellow suits would have to turn up and take away someone's loved ones without the opportunity for a traditional burial. So understandably, with fear, a lot of rumours spread about what was causing the disease. I think a lot of these rumours are often dismissed as myths or superstitions. And just as an aside, I think this is a really interesting point because I'm often asked about what are the common myths or misconceptions that we encounter when doing public engagement on viruses. And there are some, I think, that are sadly quite universal, things like mistrust in vaccines, which I'm going to show you in a minute how we deal with that. But other myths, I actually think, are just very rational thoughts if you really put them in the context of the community that they stem from and their beliefs and knowledge. And so a key take-home for today, I hope, is that if you really take the time to understand this in the audience or the community that you're trying to reach, then you can tailor your engagement to really increase its impact. A story for me that really hit this home was speaking to someone who had done this community outreach during the outbreak. And she had been to a very isolated village in dense forest that had just been hit really hard by Ebola. And the villagers had recently built a bridge over a river to be able to trade with a much larger town. They believed that by building the bridge, they had upset the water spirit, which is Mamiwatu in Creole, and that the water spirit had sent a plague, and that was what was causing the disease. So the villagers were at the point of literally taking the bridge down when the community outreach team arrived to help talk about the virus and how they may stop it spreading. So all of this really planted the seed that we should be thinking about the legacy of the outbreak, and we felt that there was a real need for engagement around infectious disease that we could contribute to, and science in general, but also because people were tuned into thinking about the virus, perhaps there was a moment where we could do this. So towards the end of the outbreak, when it was safe to do so, me and some colleagues ran a small engagement session in a local school run by the charity Educate. And we did a simple practical where we tried to extract some DNA from bananas using everything that we could source locally. And this was supposed to just be a bit fun, a bit messy, but it was also a great way to start talking about nucleic acid extraction that had been done to run PCR diagnostic tests during the outbreak. This went down really well, spurred us on. And so both Ian and I felt like we wanted to do more of this in the kind of period following the outbreak. I'd actually just moved from Ian's lab to UCL to take up a postdoc fellowship, but we decided to continue working together to do this. And we partnered up with the University of Makeni in Sierra Leone, which is here, where Ian had established a legacy lab from the sequencing tent. And we gained funding from Wellcome, and this is when it got a bit silly. So we went from running one event to thinking that we could run a whole week-long program of engagement activities around infectious disease. We wanted this to be able to be done in a quite sustainable way, so with resources that we could source locally or that we could package up, carry out to replenish once or twice a year. So what I'm going to show you in a minute is what I think are really quite simple activities done in hopefully creative ways to get over simple messages. Our goals were to use these discovery science activities to spark curiosity and conversations about infectious disease. We wanted to empower students with the really simple message that if you understand what a pathogen is and how it spreads, you can take action to protect yourself, your family, and your whole community, which we felt had been something that was perhaps missing at the start of the outbreak. And then thirdly, we wanted to use science, practical activities that weren't really available in schools in Sierra Leone to try and encourage interest in science and healthcare-based careers. So to just give you a snapshot of some of our program, on day one, we start off talking about what are microbes, different types, what are pathogens. Our team came up with this catchy slogan, microbes are on us, in us, and all around us. But one of the best things we do on day one is get them to build a laser-powered microscope. So So this is what's going on here. So if you shine a laser pointer through a suspended droplet of water from a syringe, then it kind of magnifies and projects everything in that sample onto the wall. So we get the students to collect different water samples that critically all look like they're clear. On the left, you've got one, here we go, that's pretty much from a clean tap water where you just really see the laser beam. But on the right is one from a stream, and all of a sudden you get all these shapes and shadows of different parasites, worms, maybe a bit of mud, just moving around in there. So with this, you get a genuine gasp of wonder. And this is really key to do this on day one, because what it does is reveal the hidden world. So everything that we're then about to tell them in the next few days suddenly seems possible. We build on this in day 2 by talking about how different pathogens spread and how we might prevent this, focusing, really tailoring it to those that they're most likely to encounter in Sierra Leone. And we do a secret transmission study using Halloween ghost blood, glow-in-the-dark stuff, where you infect a couple of volunteers at the start of the session and let it run, and then reveal who's become infected with a UV torch, see who the super spreaders are, and also see what in the classroom might have been key routes of transmission. And this really brings transmission in action to life. The other way we do this is by a really simple ball game. So we use a virus ball, and we time how long it takes to spread through 2 different groups of people through either direct contact or by airborne, limited to a sneeze, which is what's about to go here. And it goes down really well. So what this really does is put transmission in action, and then you can introduce things like social distancing to really show how that works and the different routes and kind of that you can intervene in with this. So on day 3, we build on this by talking about what our immune system does, how it protects us, using mostly kind of models and games to talk about antibodies, some of which were made by Ian's children who are here, so thank you very much for doing this. And a key message on day 3 is how do vaccines protect us? To really get this across, we go back to that ball game that I've just shown you. But this time we recruit a team of vaccinators. So we run the same scenario. You time how quickly the ball takes to spread through the classroom and the number of people infected. And then you give the team some vaccine cards to give out, starting with a really low number, and ask them to think whether they can slow down infection or reduce the number of cases. And what we then do is build it up. So what this enables you to talk about is the concept of herd immunity and how everyone in the room needs to do their part with taking up a vaccine for this to really stop the spread of a disease. Then the third scenario is you tell them exactly where the infected person is. And what's amazing is that the students always come up with the concept of ring vaccination, to vaccinate those closest to the infected person to stop and contain an outbreak. And this is exactly how the Ebola virus vaccine was trialed and then rolled out towards the end of the outbreak. So day 4, we get into tracking diseases, a bit of epidemiology, and we get them to be disease detectives using clues to investigate the cause of an old but real-life London cholera outbreak, before really kind of playing on and building up on about vaccines and how they work with this great board game that Ian developed, where you have teams of vaccinators versus infectors. And you build, the genius of it is that you build different villages and towns so that the scenarios always change and the game never gets old. And then finally, day 5, is the culmination, is my outbreak activity, which I'm going to talk a bit more about in a minute, but the students have to discover the cause of an outbreak, mystery disease that starts in their school, and they have to do the tests and work out how they're going to control it. So to make it so that this wasn't limited to just us, to make this run, we recruited a local team to be able to do this. And these are the guys who have really been in schools every week since 2015 running this program. I'll talk about them all at the end, but central to the whole operation was this guy, Al-Mami, who initially was our driver, and him and his car were perhaps the biggest expense for the funding, but were absolutely essential to be able to move the team and the materials around safely. Al-Mami was way more than that. I mean, I think I literally owe him my life, where the brakes failed on a rented vehicle as we were coming downhill towards a one-way bridge over a big ravine. But his skills helped us navigate many tricky situations, not just that. And this was really by through him getting to know Sierra Leonean culture, history, and perspectives, And this goes back to what I was saying about really taking time to understand the community that you're working in. So beyond our Mammy's wisdom, what did we learn? One thing I think we did really well at the start was to bring people together and help us develop the activities. We did this through running a workshop in Cambridge for anyone who was interested in public engagement to help brainstorm some ideas. What we then didn't do well was allow enough time to really develop these. So I think we had about 6 weeks between the workshop and then going to do a trial out there. And at the time, I just started my postdoc fellowship, so this kind of comes back to what I was saying about balance. I was trying really hard to not let it impact my lab work, so one way to do that is honestly to just buy yourself more time next time. We ran a trial, which was a brilliant learning experience. In hindsight, we should have kept this really small and not tried to do it with 120 students. This was also in the rainy season, so it was really hard to get around, and there were regular kind of blackouts. We didn't yet have a generator and fuel, which became another key expense of the project. But this taught us a lot about the logistics, the space, the group size that made these activities really work, and also timing. So I think at the start, we really overcooked the program and tried to get as much in as we could. But actually what we realized in being there is that because practical activities aren't very common in schools there, it was much better to allow the students longer to really explore each material and get to grips with the activities. So this taught us a lot about keeping it simple. We also had to train the team to deliver discovery science activities. And for that, you have to really hold yourself back to not deliver all the information in one go, so that you give people that chance to realize it for themselves and be able to ask questions, because I think that's what makes the message stick. Communication has been really important. It's tricky from afar and often involves managing people's expectations across cultures. So the best way that this worked for us in the end was about having a WhatsApp group so we could check in daily with the team when they were doing activities. One other thing I think we could have done much better from the start is learn how to quantify and evaluate our impact. If you think about many grant applications, there's always that box of what is your impact and what do you do? So I think if you think about this properly from the start, that becomes much easier. We didn't really know, to be honest, what we were doing at that point. We came up with a really complicated questionnaire. But this still was enough to help us learn and understand which of the activities seemed most engaging and exciting to be able to cut back on others. And it's helped us understand whether we really did bring about a change in perspective. So we give the same questionnaire at the start and the end of the week to see how this shifts. And just as an example, in answer to this question, what do vaccines do? So you can see at the start of the week, over nearly a third of all answers from over 3,000 students were either I don't know, or worse, vaccines make you sick, or vaccines are dangerous. So what's brilliant is to see that at the end of the week, this slice has hugely gone down to just under 1%. The other way, going back to our third goal of trying to inspire uptake or following science beyond school, is that, and again, it's hard to say that this is directly because of us, but we've seen an increase in the enrollment of students into the University of McKenney public health course, which has a real kind of emphasis on infectious disease. And this has gone from 12 students to 72 every year, which either way is a brilliant outcome. One part of feedback that's really important is to have kind of open-ended, because this is where you really find out what people think of your activities. And I think it also helps you kind of capture those kind of less tangible impacts, which is about building confidence or sparking conversations and curiosity. And so I just wanted to share the quote, one of the feedbacks that I'm perhaps most proud of, and really brings it home. And this is that, imagine such practical and useful education about viruses was available to most Sierra Leoneans, or at least schools, before the Ebola epidemic. It would have saved thousands of lives. This has been a great adventure. So since 2015, our team have engaged over 7,000 students for over 20 hours each, including primary and secondary school students, and we've run teacher training sessions to help try and create a legacy and make the activities sustainable. So what I hope we've created is a community of children who are much better versed in understanding what pathogens are, and how to protect themselves in both daily encounters and also in an outbreak scenario like the pandemic. So for this final chapter, I thought I just wanted to share with you how I've now taken the outbreak activity and tried to develop it further to deliver this in schools in the UK. Now, I developed this initially because I wanted to capture that real moment of making a scientific discovery. So if you just all think for a second about the last discovery you made, or your member of your team, or even just the best discovery you've ever heard of, and how that made you feel. So that moment of real excitement, which keeps us all going, is what I wanted to capture and try and put into a real-world scenario. So I've done this now with multiple scenarios that we can run from 8 through to 18-year-olds. And I thought I'd just give you a few highlights of how it runs, and this is mostly for the younger version. So the outbreak always starts in the school, or Microsoft conference, where a student comes in feeling sick, they get worse throughout the morning, they've been sent to hospital, this is the first case. And we give them a mocked up patient observation chart that they have to decipher to work out firstly what the symptoms are. While they're doing this, they're told that there's a second case. The boy's younger sister has also been taken to hospital, similar symptoms, high fever, rash, headache, and cough. And we throw in some kind of exciting family travel history to confuse things, because what we're really asking them to do is to try and match up the symptoms that they've seen to one of these 5 different viruses. And this is to challenge them to think about whether they, at that stage, can already make a diagnosis just on the basis of symptoms, or how complicated this is, and whether there are co-infections at play as well with the travel history. This is all leading them to the realization that, of course, we need to do some tests. So we take along some personal protective equipment, and we talk about how we use this in the lab, and also relate this to what they needed to use in the Ebola treatment centers. And here they get to do some pipetting. So we give them 2 blood samples from the patients, and they pipette some of the blood sample into a test tube, if you like, for each of those 5 different viruses. Now, these all look the same, but I rigged them as being different concentrations of glucose solutions, so that they can then use a test strip or a dipstick into the solution, and they have to, from the color change, interpret whether they get a negative, a weak positive, or a strong positive result. And we tell them, because of this kind of interpretation, that these are rapid-fire diagnostic tests, if you like, that are perhaps somewhat unreliable. Ooh. So here we go. So it's just to wake you up for the last bit of time. So whilst we're doing this, I'll only play that once, I promise. Whilst they're doing the test, I start bombarding them with regular news updates. The original student's family becomes infected, it spreads through the school, it starts spreading at the hospital. Multiple schools in London and across the UK start reporting similar cases, and it becomes a national outbreak. Now, obviously, this is getting a bit creative with the timeframes, but the key of this is to kind of create this sense of urgency that they are racing against an outbreak and that we really need the answers to the test. Especially because then, of course, the local news pick it up. So I always tailor this exactly to the school that we're in. As good scientists, we need them to record all of their results. And this is when it gets really interesting, because the tests are set up for the younger version to always give you a strong positive for the measles virus outbreak. But what you get beyond then, because of the interpretation of the color change, is a huge variety of results. But this is great because we can pause for discussion about how reliable they think this is. I'm always really impressed when an 8-year-old asks to do some more repeats of the test. What we're really asking them is to think about, should we go public with this news? What happens to confidence in scientists if we go too early and we're not completely sure? And how would we build on this to try and get a confident answer? And conversely, is there a risk in an outbreak to delaying kind of sharing this news? What we're leading them to do is a second test, and we introduce them to genome sequencing. For the younger students, we get them to build part of the virus's genome using different colored Lego bricks that they can then match to the reference cards. And for the older students, we give them a sequencing trace that we get them to decode and again, align to some reference genomes. And for the younger ones, this confirms that it's measles, so that we can give them a fact file and let them do some research to figure out a plan for how they're going to control the outbreak. Now, I chose measles virus because it lets us start talking about vaccinations and how that could be used and why the outbreaks may have occurred in the first place, and also because it's somewhat more uplifting to end the scenario with giving them a solution to control it. But the last piece of it is that journalists turn up and the students have to hold a press conference where they communicate what they've discovered and their plan for controlling the outbreak, which always seems to end well. So for the older students and the more senior students, it's a very similar concept, and this comes back, as I said, to science festivals where I learned that you can deliver really similar messages by just changing the language that you use. But we run a slightly extended scenario, and for this one I actually base it on a new pandemic influenza, because this lets us talk about it and put it in context of previous and in fact current influenza outbreaks. It goes global, becomes an international outbreak. And it also lets us talk about where this new strain of influenza may have come from in the first place, so we could get them to do a similar set of tests, but to test animal samples to try and find an animal reservoir and factor this into how they're going to control the outbreak. And we get them also to think about how in controlling it, not just through vaccination, can we use antivirals. So again, I rig this time a kind of commercially available colorimetric test into testing the virus from the patients against two different antivirals. So one that will work and one that doesn't work, because this lets us start talking about antiviral resistance and how we should best use those drugs. Now, the reason that these outbreaks run so well is because each time I take along a team of volunteers who help run it really smoothly. We get scientists who work with the students in really small groups, and this maximizes the level of engagement between students and scientists, and it creates the time and space for all these conversations around the activity that spark the curiosity. When I do this, I always offer it up to the whole department that I'm in, and we've had undergrads through to professors come along to help. And this is really important to me, that we try and make it as inclusive as possible, because we're going into schools and this is kind of the face of science that we're projecting to the future generation. But also because, as I've said throughout, I've realized this for also the teams of volunteers that I've worked with, that there are some real key benefits to doing this yourself. And just to summarize that, I really believe that public engagement and doing it challenges or enhances you to build your confidence in ways beyond the lab, enhance your communication skills so that you can communicate your science at all levels and all backgrounds, and really improves your clarity of thought. So by this I mean when you do a public event, you often get some really curveball questions, and those are often asked, I have to say, the toughest questions are asked by a really curious 8-year-old very often. So this challenges you to think and really test how well you understand what you're doing. Sometimes in a great way, it makes you realize how much you know. Other times it makes you realize what you don't know and maybe gives you an idea of something to go back and look up. But I also think it creates the time to step outside, our real molecular worlds and to think about your research in a much bigger picture. And this often challenges me to think if I am really addressing the most important questions. So just to finish, here's a challenge. If anyone is thinking about public engagement, here's a few things or questions to spend a little bit of time thinking about. So firstly, what do you want to talk about? Everyone in here has something valuable to say, but think about those stepping stones. What are the key messages that you think would be best to get across from your research or your interests? Make it align with your research interests, because this is where you really begin to reap the benefits that I've been talking about. Think about how you want to communicate it. Either pick a way that you most enjoy. So I've done a lot of things I haven't mentioned today, like radio interviews, podcasts, science writing, social media. There are many mediums that you can do, which kind of help me realize I enjoy face-to-face talking and seeing someone's reaction. But I've got colleagues who do these, in various different ways. So either pick a way that you enjoy, or think about what skills you want to build and use this as a way to do that. Think really carefully about your audience. I hope I've got this across. But think about who you're trying to reach with your messages and what is the context of that. Take the time to understand the audience and think about what's the best way to reach them and if that aligns with the way that you want to communicate. And then finally, talk to other people. Can you build a community to do this? Because that is often what will help lower the barrier to getting things off the ground and really kind of give you the, I don't know, motivation and to go forward and really start some activities. So with that, I've just got to say some huge thanks. Firstly to Ian, who I think I should really be sharing this award with for all the stuff that we did in Sierra Leone together. I don't think we could have done it on the scale that we did if either of us did this independently, and Ian's been a huge support through this. I think especially because, you know, he really impressed the importance of balance on this, and is aware of the risk. Sometimes as an early career researcher, it is risky to take time out of the lab and your research. So Ian really shouldered doing a lot of the, or in fact all of the administrative and logistics side of it, which freed me up to be able to focus on the more creative development of the activities and developing of the team. So beyond that, it's just been great fun to do it together. I've got to say thank you to the team in Sierra Leone, Alice, Sia, Abu, Andrew, and now Mami, because these are the ones who've really been driving that out there. And I've also got to say thank you to a team at UCL. So my supervisor is my postdoc, Professor Greg Towers, and Professor Richard Milne, who's the head of teaching there. And I was lucky when I joined UCL that they were already quite excited about public engagement and kind of shared the same philosophy that it brings all of these benefits. So they've been really keen to get behind Outbreak. In fact, they've been to nearly every event that I've run and have really kind of encouraged me to develop it. And just to evidence their commitment to science communication, here they are in a very fetching set of onesies that were designed and developed by a brilliant artist, John Walter, through an art-science collaboration we had with him. But that, to be honest, is a story for another time. So finally, I've just got to say thank you so much again to the Microbiology Society for this award. And thank you all very much for coming to listen to me. It really means a lot. Thank you.